Welcome back to the THPStrength podcast. Today we have our near and dear friend and coach, Ben Moxness, the big brain. It's a funny thing about Ben. He is really the brainchild of what we've done over the last, I don't even know, almost 10 years. So basically, I became a coach, learned a bunch of stuff. Ben was in high school because he's a wee lad. Learned a bunch of stuff while he was in high school. Getting into college, really leaned into what Isaiah and I were doing. So what years was that, Ben?
My college was
Yeah, 2018.
2018 through 2022.
Right. So this is when Isaiah and I are podcasting every day. We joined forces kind of during this time. Ben starts being let me fact check this. So he basically went to the University of THP during that period of time while he's in college. So he's kind of fact checking things. And then he goes and expands upon what we know in his PhD and then reading a bunch of research. So Ben is a great resource for us because he understands our lens of things along with, which comes from academic research. And then he also expands on it, which really is valuable to the team. And yeah, that's why we like having him on the podcast. So thank you, Ben, for being here. We appreciate your big brain. But today we're going to get into two different things. Actually, we're going to get into one thing that is ongoing and it's very interesting. So Isaiah, I'll let you explain in a couple minutes what you plan on doing and why.
You're talking about the testing?
Yes. Divulge.
Okay. TLDR, me and Tony had a disagreement about height checks versus vertical jump testing. I said I'm the highest jumper in the world. He disagreed on me using height checks. And the conclusion of it all is I actually do feel like max touch is a good way to test.
And this is a new development or?
Yeah. I basically did a post on why I think height checks are better for competitions because you can't cheat your height as much as you can cheat your reach. But then I realized, and this was from a couple of guys that were commenting, the size of your arms plays a huge role in how high your height check is. Because if you have
do we have an actual number on that?
There isn't a number, unfortunately, but the height check test would bias guys with huge long arms because it's more mass going downwards, and then your head would
someone like Cabea back in the day.
Yeah. Another thing, by the way, that we've talked about this before, but not a lot of people think about is if you have big old feet, that also convolutes it. And you look at someone like Dak, I think Dak would actually have a monstrous height check test because he has big feet. He has size 14 shoes.
Oh, geez.
He's 5'10", huge arms. His reach was tested at 8'1", at 5'10", which is ridiculous.
His reach is crazy.
Yeah.
So would you want to do a tippy toe test? Is that how you want to do it? That's what I've always said. I think
that would be the most accurate thing.
Well, I think 3D mocap and 3D motion capture, and I mentioned this in my short form video, which will come out later, but I'm not spending $60,000 on cameras.
No, I think all that to say, I do want to end. I think just having a competition in general, I think would be dope because I brought this up the other day. Usain Bolt in his prime wouldn't have been able to go out on the street, measure out 100 meters, time his 100-meter dash, and then say I ran 9.5 and say he has the record, right? Set a record, it has to be in the Olympics or a world championship or
in a competition,
sanctioned track and field event. So I think same with the NBA, right? You can't have two NBA teams scrimmage off season and then say they're the world champions of the basketball world. So I think there needs to be a competition, and I am currently being proactive. It's honestly a lot of it's up to Dak and Tony, and then Ty Jackson, the 5'4" guy. I think he should be in it too.
I talked to Anthony Height about it too, and Anthony was like, maybe in my prime I could compete, but right now I'm not in condition to do that.
Yeah.
Because he was like, nah, Isaiah definitely jumps higher. And I was like, are you in your prime? Yeah. You're fine.
And Staples commented on Tony's last post, and he was like, yeah, set up live stream, have tickets, advertise it, film it all, and have all the jumpers essentially split profits with that and stuff. But yeah, I made a group chat with all of them literally right before this podcast, made a Google Doc of everything we need to do. And I'm just feel free to add stuff to it. Let's stop talking about it and let's actually set something up.
Stop talking about it. Stop talking about it. Be about it.
Yeah, exactly. And let's crown the highest jumper in the world.
Let the contest begin.
Yeah.
I said this before. I was like, it's like, let's settle this like men with our legs.
Literally. And it could be
an old-fashioned foot race.
Yeah, especially if you can find sponsors. I'm sure finding a sponsor would be so easy, and advertising would be so easy because it's like I put like event name, who is the highest jumper in the world? Like, bro, that could sell so many tickets. I feel like
Bro,
if it was in LA or something.
Whistle, I can just imagine Whistle right now, just like literally licking their chops, like biggest jump, yeah, we can work this. Get the lighting out, get the vertex out.
I think it would be dope. And honestly, for me, I love competing, and it's a thing where like I would train really hard for it, and I wouldn't feel some type of way if somebody else won. It's just like, let's actually do something. Let's find out. And it would be sick if it was like an annual thing or something, and there's actually something to train for like that, like on that level of.
Yeah, it's like in Australia how they have the foot races on grass every year, and the prize money is like $100,000 or something ridiculous.
It could be huge.
$1,000.
It could be huge if there was a sponsor that backed it with like money and stuff. Like, I think that would blow up. So
I love it.
We'll see what happens. I'm done beefing with everybody. I want to compete.
He's done beefing. He's time to be about it.
I want to compete.
Put your legs where your mouth is.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Anyways, so put your meat where your mouth. No, sorry, that's not right. We're not talking about meat today.
What are we talking about?
We're not talking about meat today. We're talking about soft tissue. We're talking about connective tissue. Actually, is that a soft? I don't know. We're talking about connective tissue. Talking about dense, regular connective tissue, not to be confused with dense, irregular connective tissue. Shout out Anatomy AMP 301, 302. Okay. And specifically the lab section. I hated those little, what are those called? Where you put them on the little slab, the little piece of glass.
The Petri dish?
No, the slides.
Slides.
Oh,
the slides.
Yeah, I hated those slides. Anyways, so we're kind of deep diving these specific things because one, it's interesting, and I think some of the questions are related to how you actually jump higher, and tendons are very important to that. So the first question that we cooked up in the comment section here for the private users in this StreamYard video is, what is the main driver of adaptation in tendons? So Ben, I have some ideas on this, and okay, well, firstly, most of what I have seen related to Ebony Rio and Jill Cook, is that they see changes in the tendon. I think it's an MRI that they do of some sort, or like an infrared something or another.
UTC.
And it shows, what is it?
The UTC.
Is that the one that's like green and red and stuff?
Usually, it's like the ultrasound tissue characterization.
Yeah. So
maybe
does it shows like a cross section of it, or no?
The MRI would be the cross section. I think the green and red ones is the UTC. I think.
Okay. Well, either way, they like look at imaging and they're basically like, look, we see hypercellularity, we see healthy tendon, we see necrotic, dead, degenerative tendon here. It doesn't really change year to year after tendon load management protocols, but their function gets better. So after hearing that, I was like, tendons don't really like do much. And then I actually asked Ebony on a call about this, and she said that the instrumentation wasn't finite enough to be able to actually measure it at the moment. That was what she told me at the time, but that was 2019. So, or 2020 maybe. And it was actually about Isaiah's IT band and his quad tendinopathy and PFP at the time. I think I was talking to her about it. I still have the emails, but I thought it was really interesting because Keith Barr comes out and he's like, oh, look, we have this, like, what is the one that's like white and then it has the black background and it shows whitening?
That's MRI.
That's an MRI. So he's basically saying like, look, we know that this is bad, this like white spot. And then he shows later on that the white spot like decreases its intensity essentially. And his logic was, oh, isometrics are able to load this like dead necrotic portion and that it actually does reform healthy tendon tissue. So what do you think about both of those lenses? And do you have a third opinion?
I actually kind of, I like to be optimistic. So I err on the side of, yeah, we can fix your tendon and make it whole again with proper load management.
Correction. She did say that tendons our bodies are I vividly remember her saying our bodies are bioplastic and we adapt until we die. But then Jill Cook in that lecture said, look at the imaging. It doesn't change. Don't show me imaging. I only care about function. So I don't know.
Do you know how longitudinal that was? Like, was that over a course of a year to 18 months, or is that just like a 12-week?
In Jill Cook's lecture,
Yeah, do you remember?
I think it was like years.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Like, hey, this was 2 years ago, and I need imaging, and this is imaging today, and this is imaging 6. Like, they did it like longitudinally. Like,
but are they doing interventions for it?
I think he was training still. I'm not. You got to go back and watch the lecture. But what it seemed like, it was a person coming to them who had been training, trying different rehab protocols, bringing all his imaging, and saying like, what is changing here from what I'm doing? And they were like, we don't even care about any of that. All we care about is your function and your symptoms.
I swear I've seen. There was who's the other guy? The drink.
Heard him?
No. He's the guy that says like eat the vitamin C or D
Keith
or
Barr.
whatever. Keith Barr.
Yeah.
In his lecture, there was a slide where he shows.
Yeah,
I think it was
that's the
NBA
weight slide I
player,
was talking about.
and he shows the tendon before and after. And
Yeah,
that's kind of what we're referring to. So my question is, what is the main driver? I think they do. Okay, so my personal lens, based on all that information, I think they do. I do agree with Ebony. I don't think we have finite instrumentation to be able to actually measure it. I do think that it's likely that it changes. I don't think you can get a new tendon. I don't think if you rupture your patella, you're going to magically get a new one. You probably have to bind that together somehow. How adaptive or bioplastic that is, what is the adaptive reserve for it, I have no idea. I'm assuming everyone has a given bandwidth for it and adaptive like threshold, essentially, like what's the maximum amount they could adapt. You look at Isaiah is going to get way higher, and this is where we bring stress strain into the equation. Basically, he gets way more energy when it stretches way further than mine ever could, right? So he can deform more and get more energy out of it than my tendon ever could before it would tear. And Thomas Kortenbeck actually said this. Because I was like, oh, I thought tendons like didn't really adapt. And he was like, well, I think they do, because you can measure the amount of elastin and collagen 3 in the tissue. And obviously, if you have more of that elastic tissue, that would mean that it's adapting more. So that was his point a couple of years back. I don't know if it's changed, but that's what he said at the time. And I would assume that on a graph of time, force, load, deformation, whatever, Isaiah is going to have way higher metrics than I would before my tendon would tear. So I think we can all agree on that. I'm not jumping 50 inches, and he would have more than anyone, like basically. So in his patella and his Achilles. So that's my lens. I think you can change it. How much, I don't know. And I definitely don't think plyos are the driver of that. I do not think plyos are the driver of that adaptation. So hi, Bailey.
Adaptation specifically
of just tendon adaptation, like tendons changing the structure of them, like the biochemical. I don't even know if biochemical is the right word. I guess it would be
I think that's a good
biological structural.
I think that's a good segue into the question I asked. So when it comes to specifically jumping, and it's probably different for 1 or 2 feet, what are the ideal adaptations that you want? Like, what is, if you could build a perfect tendon, what does that tendon look like?
Ben, what's your lens here?
So it's so, because you obviously need a certain amount of compliance in the tendon, but in theory, according to Hooke's laws of elastic materials and stuff, you want it to be stiffer. So you want it to change its intrinsic properties, develop more cross links, all that fun stuff. So you need a stiff tendon, but you need a strong muscle that is capable of stretching the stiff tendon. And part of that is muscular strength, and part of that is coordination, like I've talked about in some other posts. Like some elite jumpers, they may not be able to squat a lot, but they have the rate of force development. They have maybe some reflexive properties that allow them to produce a crap ton of force and take in a high amount of speed, and that tendon is going to deform no matter what, because that force is going into the system. Like, that's just a mechanical property of the muscle tendon unit, is the tendon will stretch initially to absorb some of that energy, and then whether the muscle stretches or whether the muscle keeps tugging on the tendon is just dependent on various factors. But yeah, so really stiff tendon, really, really strong muscle, or really, really capable muscle of developing lots of force, but the tendon's still extensible, like it still has elastin in it. So
you're very much on the same side of what I've always long said. That's good. That's encouraging. I'm glad that the research that you dive into hasn't changed that.
So I want to, so at the extreme, right? So first, before I get into the example, what causes the tendon to stretch is specifically how much force the muscle is producing in the time interval of the task. So if jumping takes 0.3 seconds, the more force produced by the muscle in that 0.3 seconds, the more strain the tendon is going to go under, right?
Yes, but the muscle has to be acting also concentrically. If the muscle is lengthening, you're not necessarily going to get tendon strain.
Yeah.
If that
The
makes sense.
MTU, it's specifically the
So
MTU
you
to
want
lengthen
the most forceful concentric action in the muscle
while the
Yes.
MTU is lengthening.
While
and
the
then
MTU
the
is
example I was
length-
going to give, at the very extreme, you could have something really stiff. Like imagine if your tendon was steel, right? How much energy could be stored in steel if you stretch? Well, steel might not be a good example because it might break. But like you could max out the stiffness, and if you can stretch it, that's better than a less compliant because there's more energy that's stored in that tendon, right? So you just want to max out the stiffness capability as long as you can stretch the tendon.
Yes.
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 Ben
And I
and I
think,
both take a second. We're like, correct.
and I think some people think that, oh, well, if you, and I think I've gotten this comment before. It's like, well, isn't my tendon going to rupture if I stretch it too far? And that's not exactly how it works because there's a lot of protective mechanisms in the tendon to prevent that from
Just tendon
happening.
organ.
Well, that, yes. So
Well,
that, so
spindle.
that'd be one thing. Like, so you have your neural inhibition that will prevent the muscle from actually producing the force to rupture the tendon. But two, the more force going into the system, the stiffer the tendon is going to act. So for elite jumpers, you, like, for instance, say for you, you've probably reached your limit of how far the tendon will stretch physically. So then your task is you have to get the tendon stiffer so you have more force for that amount of extensibility. Or like in sprinting, you want a stiffer spring so you don't have to. So either you don't have to go to as large of a joint angle, like you don't deform as much, so you have a stiffer contact, and so the spring, like the tendon, doesn't have to stretch as far to get the same force output, which is for stride length, and that's
I
how you
will say
decrease
this,
your ground
Ben.
contact time.
I'm glad that you're like, I've had this like thought of like maybe everything I've ever known is false and I'm a fraud, but I don't feel like that anymore. I feel
John,
like
I fact checked you so much, bro.
I'm really glad
in college, man,
that my
and I
research,
can't
my
find any
evidence.
flaws.
Well, I'm glad you did because listening back to this, it's interesting to me. My dog is getting caught up in the cords, but no, I mean it's always good to have peer reviewers that kind of like question you and stuff like that. Because I mean, dude, like I've spent a lot of more time actually coaching and a lot more time testing periodization models than I have reading research about tendons in the last 3 years. Like that's just the nature of what I've prioritized. Specifically after moving to Florida. Like moving to Florida the last 18 months or 24 months, almost all of my time here like is either spent on business or coaching. I don't have a ton of time to research. And even though I understand the implications of it are very important, it's hard to find novel evidence that is valid and or reliable. And I've also realized this is many of the things that you've introduced to us are novel, moderately reliable, but they're still theories, right? Like even the winding filament theory, like you said it, you're like, well, it is a theory. And then I'm talking to the Duke coach and the Duke coach like, well, actually, I would argue that it's not the muscle, doing or the muscle expanding or winding filament theory. I actually think it's the fascia. And he's like talking about this PhD researcher where his entire line of research is fascia expanding. And then it's like, you talk to Boo and you talk to Dan and they're like on the fascia side. And then I talk to Rolf and I talk to Randy and I talk to you and they're on the winding filament theory side. And it's like, you start to realize that we're kind of trying to explain what's happening. We're seeing something visually happen. Maybe we're measuring it to a certain extent and we're trying to explain it the best way possible. But at the end of the day, it's still kind of a theory. And like, it's not like matter of fact, but like even the cross bridge theory or like sliding filament theory, like that's been like reputable and repeatable from like the 60s or 50s, that research, and or maybe later, it might have been the 70s. But like we still view it as valid. And it's like, why? It's because it's very hard to dispute. It's very hard. Why? Well, maybe the instrumentation, like I said, isn't good enough. You can't measure it at finite enough a detail to know if that's for sure what's happening. So I think in general, like some of this stuff is going to change, and I've realized that. I never thought in my lifetime this stuff would change, but I'm seeing it before my eyes. Things are changing. What I learned in school is not what's happening today. So it's encouraging that that's still the case, but that a lot of the things that I previously thought were happening, there's more and more research validating it. So like, for example, you know, this MTU lengthening muscle shortening concept. I've long been a big proponent of this, of stretch the tendon as much as possible and stiffen it as much as possible. And you need different strokes for different folks, meaning stiffer, like, and I see it when I was at Duke. That's, I think, what really helps is I see it experientially. And then when it's explained in research and validated, it like adds more fuel to the fire. So for example, this kid, Joe, freaking Joe, 10.4 sprinter, right? Super fast, 5'8". You would think you're doing an RSI test, a measure of a tendon's ability to store and release energy. And then I'm looking at a high jumper and I'm saying, okay, well, the sprinter, and I asked Mike this once, I was like, how come RSI in these multis is better than it is in a sprinter? And he was like, well, I think sprinters actually have better RSIs than jumpers and multis. And I was like, what? Really? Because I've never seen that. I've seen high jumpers have the highest RSI metrics. And that got me thinking. So then a couple years later, I go to Duke and I'm there and I see this kid, Joe. Joe's RSI was dog shit. So bad. So very bad. But it was bad in the sense of the test was a repeat jump test. And he just could not do stiff, low hurdle hops. Like the hurdles were like 20 or like 8, maybe 12 inches. And he really struggled. Like he could not get off the ground. And he was trying as hard as he could. And I'm like, it looks like, and his ankle's barely budging. That's the thing too. When I'm watching it, his ankle's like not moving. But his flight times were just crap. And I'm like, is he not strong? Is he not powerful? And then I realized, no, his tendons are so stiff that he literally can't load them in a double leg contact from that height. Like he needs to be running as fast as he can and thrusting his MF and leg into the floor, landing on the ball of his foot and trying to get as much force with as little deformation as possible out of that tendon. So I don't want to waste a bunch of time on the ground with a mushy takeoff and touchdown. I want to be super stiff and just bounce. And yeah, I think that kind of explained many of the reasons why I was like, I think 1 foot's like this, 2 foot's like this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Power jumping, speed jumping, et cetera. Like it really does explain a lot. And I do think the fact that you can't switch from a power jumper to a speed jumper is largely related to the tendon properties.
I agree. Yeah.
Like, I don't think it has to do with even your nervous system. Like you can still learn it. You can still have the mechanics to do it. It's just that you're always going to receive feedback that it's not the correct option for you because you're not jumping high. Like if I was like, you need to throw this way, but every time you threw that way, you threw 20 miles an hour less, no matter how many years you worked on it. And then I say, throw as hard as you can. And you start throwing 90. You're going to be like, okay, I'm going to throw this way. Like, and I think it's a delicate game to play because when you take that same theory and you apply it to 2 foot, then it's like, well, do you even coach technique? And I think Mike said it best because I made this argument to him. I was like, well, you see Christian Coleman run like that, and you see Usain Bolt run like this, and you see Asafa Powell run like this. Like, why even coach technique when all these guys have different technique? Ben left us. He doesn't like us anymore.
That was a great rant.
Ben disappeared, so he came back. But I said, Mike, why even coach technique if you have Christian Coleman running like this, you have Asafa Powell running like this, you have Usain Bolt running like this? Why even coach technique in 2 foot jumping whenever you have guys jumping 45 like this or 50 like this or this like this? And he said, or shot put was another one. And he said, you make a good point. And my argument to that is, as a coach, our job is to try to improve the motor patterns. And there's no way to know whether they're going to be better or not unless you try. And so we should always be attempting to move the needle in that direction, but you never want to be so dogmatic that you force the athlete to adopt a strategy that doesn't work best for them. So for example, when I'm watching a high jumper do something that's really on paper incorrect compared to the best of the best of the best, but they're still jumping 7.6. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to try to tell them what to do to jump 7.8 or 7.7, but I'm going to gently introduce it. I'm not going to force it into their system. And you have to be careful with your words and your cueing, because if you force something into someone's system, into their brain, and make them do something that is unnatural, isn't better in the long run, and might make them a worse athlete, then specifically in track, you're going to pay massive, like, I don't want to use the word dividends, but you're going you're going to lose a lot of performance, and that's going to potentially cost you points at the ACCs or Big Tens or the national, championships and things like that, or world championships. Like, you don't have the luxury. You cannot afford making those mistakes. So I might introduce something to a high jumper way differently than I introduce it to a 15-year-old kid who's a 2-foot jumper, because there's no timeline on that and the risk is a lot lower. And I might really kind of push it to a younger athlete to change it, and then let the cards fall where they will whenever you're looking at all the metrics. Like, if I know someone's RSI is really good and they're really fast and their squat sucks and they have a really short penultimate step, then most sprinters are like that, then I'm probably not going to have them change anything, because they're probably picking that because that's what their tendon property innately defaults to. But whereas like someone like Isaiah, not that fast relative to a world-class sprinter, he's very strong, very powerful, and very mobile, and jumped better almost initially from doing that. Yeah, I'm gonna push. You need to do this when you jump really high. Like,
Yeah.
and then when you start looking at the populations of people who have 48-inch verticals and higher, that's also telling. And then you compare guys like Anthony Height and Ty. They have really short penultimate steps. What do they have in common? They're really short. But then you look at Tony. Tony's 5'6", and he has a long penultimate step. So it kind of convolutes things, and I tried to make sense of it, but that's why I say you want to gently introduce these things, because tendons are way different from one individual to the next in jumping. Where sprinting, everyone has the same tendons. Everyone. But in jumping, you have athletes who jump the same height with completely different tendon properties, muscular tendinous units, and strategies. And there's evidence on this. Mike actually showed it to me. He's like, did you know that if you do 100 jumps, you're the same person, the strategy you pick at jump 40 versus jump 1 is going to be wildly different? And I think the same thing is true.
I was looking at the last
rant over, mic drop.
I was looking at the dunk session, and this goes along like for your argument for like coaching technique. I was looking at the jumps, and I was like, whoa, everything, you know how we coach everything to be big, hit big positions, intent on every step, aggression. Everything was bunched up. Like, I was looking at my approach, I think because recently I've been trying to jump underneath the vertex, and I looked at like my best jumps ever. I was getting more speed. Each step was big. This time I was bunched up. I was like taking like short steps, shorting the penultimate a little bit, and then going up. And I was like, damn, that's a technical thing that could have been changed and possibly led to bigger jumps. And it's crazy because we look at the guy we helped, Jaden Suarez. Ben, we got to show you this guy. Literally
crazy.
Horrible technique when he first signed up. Horrible technique. And for context, me and John are sometimes like, should we be coaching technique? Like, you get these guys, you just can't. You could beat them, torture them, and they still won't change their technique. Right? And they jump high still. And it's so hard for some people. This kid, Puerto Rican, shout out Boricua. He comes in, shows us a video, horrible technique, like shorting the penultimate, weird approach, not jumping very high. Fast forward, I think it was like 3 months, and he looks like Travis Slade, like beautiful positions, right, left, long sprint on his penultimate. Jumped lower initially. Now he's jumping like 2-3 inches higher than his PR before. And it was just like, and I was asking him, I was like, oh, what cues did you change? He's like, oh, I started my approach farther back. I threw my hip forward. And I was just like, it validated what we've been telling people. And a lot of times you don't see it because guys are so stubborn. They don't take our advice.
You can't see the video playing, right?
I think Ben might have to leave soon. Ben, feel free to, if you have to dip, you could dip.
Yeah, my patience here, but I have a little bit of time.
This is the video. You guys can see it, right?
Yeah.
So that's his tiny penultimate step. It was really bad. And then this is after he worked on it. So he literally had to relearn how to jump.
Yeah.
And
then scroll down. Keep going.
Oh.
Keep going. Oh, is that the last one?
There's nothing else. Yeah. That was the small one. That was a tiny penultimate.
You might have to hold up. I'll pause.
Does he actually dunk it?
Yeah, it's one of the first one. I think he dunks it. He yams it. The small ball.
Open. And then if I go, so we finally found the clip, and this is Jaden, and way better, way better. I mean, it's literally not even close. So this is a scenario where the change is actually insane. Like it's actually crazy how much of a difference he made in. I don't even know how long you said it was, Isaiah. It
Like
was
3 months, 4 months. The whole process.
Yeah, but the amount of change that he got from that period of time was crazy, and it's one of those things where you do have to ask yourself, was it better? Is it better? When you compare it, I think that the ceiling is way higher in the latter versus the former, right? Like that looks like dog shit to me. And here's the other thing, you can always divert back to that if like you naturally have this automatic feedback, right? So he's jumping higher now, based on that last video.
And I want to emphasize, he jumped lower for 3 months.
Yeah. So
Most
it is a
people aren't
long-term
willing
play.
to go through that.
I agree. And 2-foot jumping as well. 2-foot jumping as well is so different than 1-foot. The speed jumper versus long short conversation is just an entirely different thing. Ben has a few minutes, so we're going to let him finish up with what he wanted to say. So Ben, what were you saying about tendons rupturing and the concentric role of muscles?
So back to because like I said before, a common question I get is, well, if you stretch the tendon more, well, won't it rupture? But you got to keep in mind that if your muscle is acting concentrically to stretch the tendon, this is putting more stress through the tendon, and based on its intrinsic properties, it makes the tendon stiffer. So, like for instance, with an Achilles rupture, you're at a really long MTU length. Like you're usually stepping back, your knees extended, your hips are extended, your trunk's a little flexed, but the gastroc is lengthening, and so then the heel drops, gets to that, basically the heel is just flat on the ground, and then the gastroc turns on concentrically, but the whole MTU is at a long length, and then the Achilles snaps. But if the gastroc was acting concentrically and didn't yield and lengthen and prevented the heel from dropping, then even though the tendon is technically stretching while the heel is dropping, but it won't drop to the floor, and now you don't rupture your Achilles and you're faster off the ground. And the same kind of thing would be at the quad. If you're acting so concentrically, stretching the tendon's actually acting stiffer for you, so that you're actually preventing rupture from not yielding.
So I know you have to leave soon.
The synchronization of it is important.
Could you tell us how to make your muscle act more concentrically?
You got to get strong, especially eccentrically. THPStrength.com.
But it is there. It's also the rate of force development during it. There's a lot of other pieces here, but also I saw something that really grinded my gears on someone's story today, and it was about a copycat program, and it really upset me. So if you feel like a program's better than us, I actually genuinely am curious, not trying to be like a rude prick, just to improve. Tell us why, so that we can be better, because that's important to me. Is being better is important. I like to be better, and I will spend time on the things that will make us better. So yes, that is all. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It was a long, no, it wasn't long. It wasn't long. I hope it was interesting. It was an interesting conversation. I enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys did too. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining, Ben.
Absolutely. Love being here.
Bye-bye.
So